Right, I'm going to show you guys how to use my XDR testing site. It's on GitHub, and this is the URL. You can just go out and search for Scott Brimley or Palo XDR testing. What this will do is set up a kind of virtual environment where you have basically two Windows hosts and Linux hosts, all sharing the same network. And host 1 is set up to attack host 2. And so you can launch attacks from both, but there's actual scripts that are kind of hard coded into attacking 2 from 1. You can change them around, all that kind of stuff. You know, none of this is in writing because it's GitHub. All the tests are stored in atomic tests. And you'll see this runs all tests for Windows platform and all tests for Linux platform. Here is the other one. And you can go through and see what each of the individual tests look like. What I've done is just taken this from the Atomic Red Team site. I've worked with it until it kind of worked in my environment, and then I test it out really good, and then I throw it into this project, and then I'll add it to the script that runs all this stuff. But to do this, you really only need a few things. First thing you're going to need is the requirements here. So you need Vagrant, and basically you can go to the Vagrant site. Which is here, and download Vagrant and install it. And then the other one you'll need is VirtualBox. I'll probably work on a VMware version of this as well. It's not too much of a stretch from VirtualBox. The thing was, in the past, they had it set up in such a way where it costs money to have a connector from Vagrant to VMware for whatever reason, some sort of licensing thing, I'm sure. But I'll check that out and see what's going on and see if it's really prohibitively expensive or not. But once these are installed, then I'll get on and show you the rest. Vagrant, you can do a box list and see if Vagrant first responds, and then it'll tell you if there's any boxes. The way Vagrant works is it typically has some sort of box out in the cloud, and it'll download that the first time. I've built a customized box around this, and then Vagrant makes sure that it's built consistently every single time, no matter what happens. What I did in this project is I created a couple different things. I created a build and then a run. We're going to just do the run. Keep it simple. We're going to go through the tests and stuff. The build is for building that box if we need to modify it or do something else. So we always know how all these things are built from the ground up, and you can look in there and see, you know, how things are being built. The next thing you're going to need, and I don't need these anymore, so I can put those in the trash. And I'll spin up VirtualBox here, just so you can kind of see it. Yeah, and so we'll look at that later just so we have some visibility in what's going on. So I create inside my projects directory basically just a folder called private, and what this has in it is the keys, which is what you see here, this example file. So these are the two Windows keys that I use for my Windows 10 hosts, and so this project will automatically license the Windows host. You don't have to deal with all that stuff as it builds them. But you have to put the keys in the key batch file because that's where it gets them. And then that way it also doesn't get pushed up to like GitHub or something because we don't want to put keys on the internet. The other thing you need to do, we're testing Cortex, right? So you got to go to Cortex and download the agent installers. So you're going to want a Windows installer, which is this MSI, and you're going to want to name it Cortex XDR.MSI, and then a Linux OS.sh, which is the Linux installer. And I just keep them in this private directory because I use them over and over again. So the way a GitHub project works, I can either use git clone using the program git, which Linux and Mac have natively. Windows does not. So if you don't want to download and install git or whatever, you can just do a download zip and then zip it on your drive. but I'm going to do it from get clone to show that. So I just copy the link by clicking here, and then I'll go over here and I'll do a get clone, and we'll just make sure I'm in my projects directory, right? Get clone, and then kick it off. And it'll actually download and put this project in this folder. You can see we have two folders now, private, XDR testing, and private. And so, like I was saying before, I want to take the private and stick it into the project. So now it's sitting in there. So now the project will know how to get to it. And in my my directory here, I want to hop into that actual folder because I want to be able to vagrant up. So Vagrant by default is going to look in the same directory that you're already currently in for the Vagrant file to run. And so I want to be there, and I'll just do Vagrant up, right? And kick it off. And so what happens here is it's downloading the box from Vagrant Up, actually, which is the cloud service. And this is one of the pre-built boxes I built. And you can see this is version 1.2 of it. So you can go out there and see it. You can see in the Vagrant file, there's a couple different versions depending on what you're doing. The latest version is the 1.2 right now. And it'll download the box the first time, and it'll store it on the local machine. That's what the Vagrant box list does. So you'll see it in there. So all the boxes that are here. So that way you don't have to like download this every time. I also did some things to try to shrink the image a little bit with Windows because it gets really, really big. And originally it was about 8 gigs, and now I've gotten it down to about 5, which is quite a trick. But we'll just go ahead and let this kind of roll through. All right. So now what you're going to see, since it's downloaded, is it's actually going to start building each of the individual boxes. And it'll look something like this once it gets done. You can see it's checking the checksum. So I did a SHA-256 on the box before I put it into the actual repo. Little security measure. Make sure it doesn't change and nobody's monkeying with the box. So now it's going to start building host 2 officially. And it's pulling from Vagrant Up, sbrumley/Palo Win10. If you go out to vagrantup.com, the cloud, you can actually find this project too. And you'll see there's 2 or 3 different versions. I took the original one off, but now there's probably like 2. One's a cleaner box without as much of the like memcats and things like that installed. And then this one's like loaded up, so you don't have to worry about build failure while you're wanting to test. That's why we typically in a DevOps circle separate our build from our run. This may also be the point where you hear your machine scream if it's not got a lot of resources. I try to keep these boxes really small, so each one of them's using about 2 gigs of memory, but they still have to use CPU. And since there's 3 boxes, that's going to be pretty much like kind of 3 CPUs in a virtual sense. Now you can see it's setting the forwarding ports for the VM and setting the host name. It'll set up WinRM because it's actually using that. You can see the username is Vagrant. I set the passwords to Vagrant as well. It's kind of a typical practice. Doesn't really matter in this case, but yeah, I mean, if I was in a world where we would keep these somewhere on a drive or whatever that weren't publicly available, you'd want to change all that. Now it's installing the actual Cortex XDR client, the Windows version that we have in our private directory. over here. And then it forced it to check in. That way the policies will be ready and applied by the time everything gets spun up. It applied the licenses to the box for Windows. And now we're building box 1. And the reason I did box 2 before box 1 is originally I had it set up to where the bootstrap just kicked off the tests. And you can do that too. You can modify the bootstrap in the scripts file and bootstrap.bat in this case. And it'll spin up, could spin up all the tests as soon as they boot. And you could do the same thing with the Linux bootstrap.sh. So if you wanted to force it to start running tests right out of the box, you could just call it from there. But I'm going to show you the whole manual process, because sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you want to just run one thing or the other, and I didn't want to force you into this since it's going to be connected to the XDR instance already. So maybe you don't want anything but one to be tested. So this gives you kind of that opportunity. And you'll notice it's rebooting the box. A lot of that comes with the fact that it's Windows, and when you set the name in Windows, it has to reboot the box. We had our virtual box, so you can see it's actually built the first 2 boxes. I can see the screen over here in the preview of like kind of what's going on, so you can see it, watch it boot as well. Now it's booted, right? So once it gets to a point where Vagrant can connect back to it and that service is running, then it'll move on to the next thing. And then at this point, see the running provisioner shells where it starts to run the bootstrap. So it's actually going to start installing Cortex and check in and all that. The good thing is you can kick all this stuff off and go get a cup of coffee, come back, kick off your automated scripts to go and attack things, get a cup of coffee or do something else. That's probably the biggest benefit to me, because then I don't have to babysit everything and make sure it all built or was all configured correctly. And if the configuration was different because of something else I did last time, everything's always back to square one. I even delete all my projects and stuff all the time. I deleted Vagrant and VirtualBox to make sure I could download it while on the VPN and everything else. So yeah, that all worked. It also makes sure that, you know, that my boxes are base for real. And now it's going to build the Linux box, and you're going to notice this is a little bit faster. Linux is a lot smaller. They tend to work on making it more streamlined. And I took one of the smaller boxes of Ubuntu, basically. I think it's 1804. Powered off, powered on, host change name, running. Okay, now Ubuntu is built, and it'll run through its provisioning or its bootstrap as well to bootstrap the machine. So it'll install the Linux. The only caveat with the Linux, I ran into a problem at one point and hadn't been able to run it down completely to where if you checked in right after the install, it went into some sort of like never land. So I just made it a part of the run script. So when you do an all, it'll force it check in, but you can manually do it, in Linux at any time too. All right, so we're built. So now when you take a look at your boxes, right, you can see all the boxes that are there. So we have two. We have the Palo one, version 1.2 that we downloaded, and then the Ubuntu box that we downloaded. And it built 3 virtual boxes on our VM, our virtual box. Vagrant is nice because as long as I'm in this directory, I have access to the Vagrant file. It tells me how I can SSH into a host. And so I can SSH into host 1. Also allows me to do RDP. I'll show you that in a minute. Vagrant is the password. And then basically you can do anything you can do in a regular Windows box. I've set all this stuff up to be headless just because it's easier and takes less resources. So what I'm going to do first is it actually mounts everything in the project to the Vagrant directory. And so you'll see atomic tests and everything else. And so if you change a test on your local box, it'll change inside the VMs also, just FYI, which is also handy. And I'm going to run this all Windows PowerShell, which is when I start off with PowerShell. And it'll take a little while. It does some nasty things to the box and runs memcached to see if XDR is listening. It'll go through and try to create shadow copies and delete shadow copies and muck with a lot of different things in the box. It'll try to undo a lot of that stuff. The beauty of this is like I don't have to worry about it jacking something up because I can just go back and do a Vagrant destroy and then Vagrant up again. And I don't have to do a whole lot. But we'll let this run through its tests and then we'll test the Linux. And I'll show you RDP and that'll be enough for today, I think. And you can see when I do my testing, I like to add what sections and what tests it's running and stuff. And I use the T numbers from the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so you can kind of see all that stuff as it happens. So if anything, you don't think something's working, or if you want to understand the test better, you can dig into it and see. All scripts are pretty much manual in the fact that they don't go through all these directories and just recursively start running tests. I literally put in each individual test just so I know that it's in there and stuff. It's just a mental check for me. And it's cleaning up the test. Does some bits admin. I like this because this is a good opportunity sometimes to test that kind of downloading stuff from the internet sort of thing. Looks like command and control sometimes as well. All right, and you just do exit, and now I'm back in my operating system, and I can go to host 3, which is the Linux host, and you can set it where Vagrant will pre-share keys, so it already kind of knew how to get into this box with Linux. With Windows, I have to kind of force it, so it's just easier to type passwords and do that. Sometimes it gets jacked up based on whether or not your host system's Windows and if you actually have keys and all that kind of stuff. So that can be a bit of a pain. So as far as the Linux goes, it always mounts on /Vagrant. And so I'll see the atomic tests in there and all Linux. And so this one's going to take a little bit just because it's simulating a CPU load using a program called Yes. User bin sbin yes, which is kind of silly because all it does is respond with a Y. But it's really good for a simulated attack on the actual CPU for trying to load it up and kind of DOS your processor. I had to set it for like a 60-second interval because it will kill your box. All right, all tests are completed. So I promised I was going to show you the RDP. So you need an RDP client installed on your local box. The first time you're running on a Mac, I don't know if it's different on Windows, but first time you're running on a Mac, it's just going to start up remote desktop. So I just go back in and run it again. If you start remote desktop before you do it, then it'll go straight to logging in. And same thing, Vagrant and Vagrant. And now you're logged in. So it'll pull up a remote desktop of any of the Windows boxes. So you'll be able to modify and play around with stuff in there if you want to use that as well. Now, inside the Vagrant file, something to mention, if you have more resources and you want to give it, say, 4 gigs or 8 gigs or 16 gigs, you can just go in the Vagrant file and up it. You'll see a section where it says mem, and I can show you that too. But basically, and I'll show you in the Git project because that's probably a good thing to get used to doing. And all the instructions are here as well. But yeah, if I click on the Git file, you can see how it's built. So this is what it's doing. It runs through the first config here, host 2, and you'll see where it's actually spinning up the memory for host 2, which is 2048, which is 2 gigs. And then same thing for host 1, and then another one for host 3. But that is pretty much all I was going to show today.